Okay, so today I wanted to talk to y'all about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've been teaching for 12 years now, and in 9 of those 12 years, I have had a inclusion support or co-teacher, as it's called, depending on your campus. So my training today is going to be over how to effectively use a co-teacher, as well as why do we have co-teachers. So co-teaching is the practice of pairing teachers together so that you can share the responsibilities that you would normally have within the classroom. Sometimes co-teaching is actually what it says, co-teaching, and sometimes it isn't. And I think far too often there's more misconceptions about co-teaching than there are answers to questions. And so that's the reason, the why of our training today. Yeah, co-teaching. Sorry, lost my train of thought. So in co-teaching, there are many different models that you can use. We'll get to that actually here in a few minutes. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of the why. Why do we co-teach? What is it, and what purpose does it serve? Okay, inclusion support is what it's called on my current campus. And what you have is you have a regular education or general education teacher who is paired with a special education teacher. So in my class, you have myself, who is a science composite certified teacher. And I also have my cohort, Mr. Davis, who is a special education certified teacher. So the gist of it is I am there to provide the general education, go over the planning and making sure that we're teaching the right things, and Mr. Davis is there to make sure that everyone is getting the support that they need. One of the good things, or one of the many good things about co-teaching, if done effectively, is that there's more opportunities for interactions. So in my classroom, since it is both myself and Mr. Davis, you have 2 teachers now for every 25, 30, 22, depending on the class period. You have 2 teachers in the classroom as opposed to just being 1. So while we're working through physics problems, or we're working through chemistry problems, or, we're fill in the blank, whatever it is that we're working on at the moment. Right now we're doing periodic table. But while you're working on that, and I give the instruction, then we have our time where the students are independently doing the work on their own, and you have Mr. Davis walking around the room who's helping the students, and you also have myself walking around the room helping the students. So instead of it just being me and 30 students who could possibly all be vying for my help, depending on the day and what it is that we're teaching, you have myself and Mr. Davis. So it helps having that extra teacher in there, because you get to spend more time with those individuals who need the help. Another thing that you have in a co-teach classroom, or an inclusion support classroom, when it's, like I said, and all of these are when they're done correctly, and we'll get to some of the problems a little bit later as well. But one of the things that you have is you have those students with disabilities who, instead of placing them in a more restrictive environment like a resource classroom, they get placed into a classroom such as mine, where they are getting that least restrictive environment, which is what we're required by law to be placing them in anyways. And they're given them more of an opportunity to succeed, because you have both of those teachers in there who are helping that student. They also are, have the easy access to the specialized instruction. So students, for example, when I'm giving a test, I might have, in any given classroom, I might have 8 students out of those 22 to 30, or sometimes 16 on a good day. I have one class period of 16. But anyways, you might have 8 students who need their test to be read to them, because that's what they're individualized education plan, right? Their IEP. That's what their IEP says that we have to do. And we all know that when an IEP says you need to do something, it's not a suggestion. This is something that needs to be done because it's legally binding. And so those students now, I don't have to find somebody who has time during that class period and has seats to be able to read that test to them. I already have Mr. Davis in class. So Mr. Davis can take those students with him across the hall to a lab. Sometimes he takes, if it's a smaller number of students, he'll take them into his office, or he'll go, he'll find a spot maybe in the library where he has an opportunity to read those tests to those students. And the huge benefit, in my opinion, on that is those students already know him. They're not going to have their test read to them by somebody who hasn't been in class. They have somebody that they've already got a relationship with, who's already been, walking around the classroom and helping them while we're learning the information, and they know the style that I taught it to the kids in. They have that person who's going to then be in there reading the test to them, instead of them going from my science classroom to, oh, well, I found an inclusion support teacher who can read it to you, but they've only worked in English. I have somebody now who's been working in science with me, who's seen everything that the children have seen. So they get just that better relationship, that better rapport, as well as a better concept of the content. Another thing that's a huge benefit for the students in the co-teacher, the inclusion support model, is that you have increased independence. And that kind of goes back to that not being placed in a resource type classroom. Those students are given more opportunities to be independent in the co-teaching model because they're in a, quote unquote, normal educational setting. They're just in a regular classroom with a regular teacher doing everything that the regular students who are in that class are doing. The only difference is they have a co-teacher who's in there to support them when they need it. And, like I said, depending on their IEP. But they get that, instead of it being 5 students in a resource classroom with a teacher, they get the, like I said, normal educational experience of being in a classroom with 30 other kids. But it's really a 15-to-1 ratio because you have the 2 teachers in there. Another thing with co-teaching is that the teachers are able to support one another by complementing each other's strengths and weaknesses. For example, Mr. Davis is great with the kids when it comes to taking that extra time to show them one more time to work the problem, to show them one more time how they find the number of electrons in that atom, to show them one more time. I guess basically what I'm getting at is he's more patient than I am, and that's fantastic. Not just for the special education students, but for all of the students in my classroom. They all get the added benefit of the fact that is a co-teach setting, or an inclusion support teacher is in there with us. So all the students get that benefit, not just the special education students. And you have the other side of that coin that because he is more patient, you have my side of the coin where he doesn't handle students asking to go to the bathroom, or needing to go see the nurse, or wanting to go see a counselor, or just kind of those normal details that you have in your day-to-day classroom. Not that anybody has students who constantly ask to go to the bathroom, right? But that kind of falls back on me, and I get to be more, or have to be more really, of the disciplinarian, because Mr. Davis is seen as the kind of kinder, gentler teacher between the two of us in the eyes of the students. And so because of that, and because of the fact that he wants to have that role with those students, I pick up the slack of, okay, that's fine. I'll be bad cop when I need to be bad cop. And you also have like I said, you just kind of have that yin and yang effect with your co-teacher. And when you have the right co-teacher, you just really, it just, everything, you just kind of have a synergy to it, and everything just works so well. So one of the other things to talk about with co-teachers is kind of the ugly side of it, the what can go wrong. And far too often I see that this goes wrong when I'm, in other, unfortunately, I've been in classrooms where I've had a co-teacher on paper only. I've been in classrooms where I've had a co-teacher who will walk into class and say, hey, coach, I've got to go out to the field house. I need to handle fill in the blank. I've heard, honestly, probably just as many excuses from co-teachers as to why they need to miss class as I have from actual students, which is sad. But like I said, that's one of those things. That's those problems that you see when you have co-teaching. You see co-teachers who walk in and say, "Oh no, that's a general education student who needs help on that. That's not my kid. That's your kid." It's like, well, okay, well, I'm over here with a small group of 5 students who need help, and that student just has one question that they need you to just really quickly answer, and then you can move back on, and they'll give the answer of, well, no, you can get to them after you help the group that you're on, but that's not my kid, so I'm not going to help them. But like I said, in a good co-teaching or inclusion support setting, like I'm fortunate to have with my co-teacher, Mr. Davis, both teachers work together for all students. The general education students aren't just mine, and the special education students aren't just his. It's all students belong to both teachers. So I have 30 kids in a class. He has 30 kids in a class. It's not he has 8 kids in this class and I have 22, and I ignore the special ed students and he ignores the general ed students. It's we come together to work for the betterment of all of them, which is, like I said, that's what's supposed to be happening in an inclusion support system. Another problem that I've seen, like I said, is teachers who, for lack of a better way of putting it, they allow their co-teachers just to skip out. And you'll have there's another campus that they'll do QR codes to scan in so that the co-teachers can log their minutes. So that way, if a student has 450 minutes of in-class support, their way of making sure that student is receiving those 450 minutes is the co-teacher scans in on a QR code. They just pick up their iPad and scan it in when they walk in, which is great if the teachers stay. But far too often, those teachers will walk in, scan the QR code. Hey, there's cake in the lounge today. I'm going to go down to the lounge. And then they'll come back 45 minutes later, and that student or those students, if it's more than one, they haven't received their 45 minutes that they're supposed to receive that day. So they're ultimately not getting their 450 minutes that they're supposed to get every 2 weeks. And that, like I said, that kind of goes back. It goes back on a bunch of different people. It starts with the co-teacher who's, using that as an excuse to not be in class because they're scanning in. But it also goes back on, if it was me as a general education teacher, I'm sorry, but no, you're not going down there. You need to be in here to help me to help the kids. I've seen also teachers that have, like I said, they treat it as an extra off period. Well, hey, I've got laundry that I need to do down at the field house. So, we've got a game tonight. I need to make sure I wash the pants or wash the jerseys or, fill in the blank. And unfortunately, no, that's not what you have to do. You have to be in here in class, to give those students that support. It's not an off period for you if you are an inclusion support teacher. And like I said, you're going to have problems with anything, but what our focus is going to be on is the good of the co-teacher, the good of the student, the good of the aspect of the instructional support setting. Some models that will help you with that if you are struggling trying to figure out what's the best way to fit that yin and yang role, what's the best thing that I can do as a co-teacher to help my general education teacher, what can I do as a general education teacher to best help my co-teacher. There's some different models that can be used. The first one is one teach, one observe. This is something that me and Mr. Davis use a lot, and it works well for us. The thing that I would tell you is you need to get with your co-teacher and you need to see which one of these is going to work best for you, because just because something works really, really well with myself and Mr. Davis does not mean that it's going to work in your classroom. You have to figure out who fits in what spot and who fills out what role, and who's better equipped to fulfill the different tasks. So like I said, in ours, we do the one teach, one observe. We do that a lot, where one teacher, me, is instructing the class, who's lecturing the class about how to solve the equations, where to plug in the numbers. Like I said, currently we're doing a lot of work with a periodic table. So, what is the atomic number? What does it mean? What is the mass number? What are these letters here in the middle of the box? How do I figure out the number of neutrons? Those actual science tasks that we're doing in class. And while I'm doing this, Mr. Davis is almost acting like a student. He's observing me to make sure that he is caught up, not necessarily on the content because he knows the content, but caught up on how it is that I talk about the content. So if I use a certain phrase, or if I use a certain way of solving the algebra, when going back to last semester, we're doing the physics part of IPC. If there's a certain way that I do it, he's making sure that, there might be 14 other ways to skin that cat, but he's making sure that he's learning the way that I do it, because that's the way that the kids are being taught. That way he's not taking them into a different direction to solve the problem, which can be very confusing, especially for the special education students. If they're being taught one way to do it on Monday, and then on Tuesday when they're putting it into practice and they're getting small group help, they're being taught a completely different way to do it, then you've just spun your wheels for 2 days, right? And on top of that, you've also confused them. You might have spun your wheels and turned the car around. Okay, but if he's observing while I'm teaching and he's learning how it is that I'm teaching them, then now he's better equipped to help them when it comes time for the walking around and monitoring. Another thing that happens still within that one teach, one observe model is he's also observing me as a teacher. If I'm focusing on one side of the classroom, or if I'm letting one or two students answer all the questions, or if I'm letting one or two students, kind of slack off back in the back or off to the side, or put their heads down, or he's observing that, and then he'll come to me afterwards and he'll let me know. He'll say, hey, and actually sometimes he does it in class, which you might think, oh man, that's frustrating. You got somebody who's telling you, hey coach, you need to wake that kid up over there, or hey, why don't you call on somebody else? Johnny's the one answering all the questions. And I don't think it's frustrating at all. I love it, because it's helping me to help those students who that ultimately that's why we're here. And so what happens is he'll stop me sometimes when I'm mid sentence and hey coach, let's Johnny's already answered 5 questions. Let's call on somebody else. Why don't you, I've got index cards that I use when I remember them to randomly call on students, and he'll say, coach, hey, why don't you get your index cards? Instead of asking the students and just letting them answer, or he'll say, hey coach, why don't you walk over and check on little Jimmy who's got his head down to make sure that he's okay, or sometimes he'll get up and he'll do that himself as well. So it's not always me doing that. It's not always him just being in there as a, hey, this is how you can do your job better, but it's a working together. And I cannot stress enough how much it's that synergy of when two people are there with that common goal and focusing their energies on that, everything flows so smooth, and it's really, really amazing to watch. Another Another that's similar to the one teach, one observe is called one teach, one drift. And in the one teach, one drift, it's the same thing, except instead of the co-teacher sitting in the back of the classroom and taking notes, or sitting down in a desk and taking notes, and observing the teacher as well as observing the students, it's one person is teaching while the other teacher is providing assistance. So sometimes if we're working on math problems and Mr. Davis already knows, okay, well, these 4 students really, really struggle with the math, he'll pull them together and sit them in a small group, and he'll sit with them. And while I'm lecturing, he's making sure that they're writing the right things down. He's answering questions on the fly to them that they're having without stopping what's going on in class. So they're still getting the instruction that I'm giving them, and he's giving them extra instruction on top of that at the same time to keep them on track, to keep them on task, to make sure that their notes have the things written down that they need to have written down. And like I said, sometimes he drifts, like it says, one teach, one drift, where he's drifting from, one student to another. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm going to drift all of you together into this small group, and I'm going to make sure that your notes look the way that they're supposed to look. I'm going to make sure that you're paying attention. I'm going to make sure that I'm here to answer your questions because I know this is something that you struggle on. This is in your, this is in your IEP that, hey, this is something that they struggle with, so let's make sure we focus on it and we attack it. Another one is called station teaching. We actually don't use station teaching in my classroom. I have used it in the past in a former setting when I was in another district. And what station teaching is you basically, no, I'm sorry, I'm talking about parallel teaching, not station teaching. Parallel teaching, what it is you have the class gets divided into 2 groups. So you would have myself standing on one side of the classroom and teaching one half of the class, and then you would have your co-teacher standing on the other side of the classroom teaching the other half of the class. What it does is it allows for that smaller group, that more individualized instruction. But what you really, really need for parallel teaching to work well is you need somebody who is really, really well versed in the content. And in my former district where I did parallel teaching, it really worked well because my co-teacher, she was certified in special education and science. So she had that dual certification so that she had a really good grasp on the science concept of it so that she could teach her own class. And she actually taught a couple of resource classes as well. So she had the necessary skills content-wise, TEKS-wise, to cover that. Station teaching is something that we do. It's a science class. We do a lot of stations. We do a lot of, especially when we're doing labs. And in station teaching, you're dividing the subject that you're teaching up into segments. So you might have one teacher teach these 3 segments over here, walk through it with groups, and another teacher is observing and walking through the other 3 segments on the other side. You rotate, the students rotate as they go from one segment to the next. A lot of times when we do this in the lab, I'll kind of tell Mr. Davis beforehand, like, hey, station number 5 today is going to be a hot spot. I'm going to need you there because there are going to be questions. I'm going to be over here at station number 1 because there's fill in the blank. The last lab we did, there was a Bunsen burner that was having to be lit and turned off and relit every time we rotated through the station. So I was telling him, like, hey, for safety reasons, I've got to be there with that Bunsen burner. I have to. I have to make sure that they're doing it right because we want the roof to still be on the school when we leave today. But he was, though, over at station number 5, where there were going to be questions, just the way that the station was. It was one that there's always questions that come up on, well, how exactly do I do this? I know you're asking me, is this a physical or chemical change, but I don't really understand because I'm not seeing anything happen that's different from this other mixture that we did, and so it's a little more intricate, and so you can kind of, hey, you're sitting at that hot spot at that station, I'm sitting at this station where I'm needed, and it works really well to have, like I said, that second set of eyes and hands and ears, and that other teacher in your classroom. Alternate teaching is a method that we use, kind of like I was talking about with the taking the notes. But in this method, you have one teacher that's handling a large group and another one who's taking a small group somewhere else. We've been doing that a lot more recently, where Mr. Davis will take a group of students, and it's not always. And one thing to note, and I don't know that I said this earlier, I think I did, but one thing to note is, it is perfectly fine for the co-teacher to take, when they're going to work, and like this one in the alternate teaching, when they're taking a small group to go work, it's okay for them to take a couple of general education students who are struggling. It's perfectly fine. You're both there for everybody. We are there to make sure that the students are taught. We are not there. I'm not there for the general ed, and he's not just there for the special ed. And so we've been doing that a lot lately. We're working on, we're working through a little packet of worksheets, and I've been kind of walking around monitoring the classroom and just making sure that everybody's doing the work they need to do, answering questions when they come up. And he's been taking those students who need a little bit more, and he's been taking them across the hall to the lab, and he's been working with them and giving them a little bit of added instruction. So while the other teachers are doing, or while the other students are doing an individual practice, these students are doing a group practice with a teacher. So they're not totally independent on all of the problems. It's hey, so remember the first step is this. Now everybody write that first step down. Okay, who remembers the second? So they're still kind of doing almost like the rest of the class was doing when they were getting the large group instruction of, working through the various different models together and the examples. They're still getting that type of instruction, but they're getting it in a different setting. It's that alternate teaching. They're getting it in a different setting because they have, like I said, some of them, they have it in their IEP that, hey, when you're doing math work, they need to have it broken down step by step. And some of them, it's just, hey, we've identified that student does not do well with this type of problem. So let's get them over there and get them the help that they need, regardless of what they're, if they have it in their IEP, or even if they don't have an IEP. If they need help, they need help. And that's what we're there for. And that's one of the things, like I said, that I absolutely love about Mr. Davis is that, he is there. He's there for the kids, and, just like I'm there for the kids. And we have that good working understanding that it doesn't matter if it's a special ed kid or if it's a general education student. If they need help, they need help. And we're going to make sure that they get that help. Team teaching is another one. We called this tag team when I was back in KDISD. So team teaching or tag teaming is where you have two teachers who are sharing the responsibility for delivering the instruction. So, and like I said, that worked really, really well, just like the parallel teaching, when you had two teachers who were both certified in the subject. Mr. Davis would tell you, hey, I'm really good at teaching you how to do it, but I need Coach Kirksey to teach it first so that I can understand and kind of refresh myself on it. But when you have that teacher who is not only special ed certified, but is also content certified, you can do the tag teaming where, all right, hey, I'm going to be up here for the first 15 minutes teaching them how to do this. You're going to be up here for the next 15 minutes teaching them how to do that. And then they'll have their individualized time to practice and work through the problems at the end, where we're both walking around and monitoring. But the good thing about team teaching or tag teaming is I found that it really helped the kids to, kind of break up the monotony of, oh, well, yeah, he's the one that's talking to me all the time, or she's the one that's talking to me all the time. Well, now both of us are talking to you all the time. So I'll have students who won't ask me a question because they only want to ask Mr. Davis because he's the nice one that always helps them. I'm the one that's lecturing. So now in a tag team environment, well, we're both lecturing and we're both helping, instead of, kind of like I said earlier, I'm most of the time I'm bad cop and he's good cop, which I'm okay with that because we have our roles, we have our strengths, we fill them well, and it works beautifully in my classroom. So those are different models of co-teaching. The main thing that you need to do with co-teaching is you need to make sure that you and your co-teacher are both on the same page. If you're walking into class thinking that you're going to be tag teaming today and you're going to be team teaching or parallel teaching, and your co-teacher is walking into class thinking that it's going to be one teach, one observe, or one teach, one drift, they're not prepared to teach. And if you haven't talked about that beforehand in a PLC section, and as you were planning everything out, then you're setting yourselves up for failure. And you have to be on the same page. Another thing I would say is you don't have to use the same model every day. I mean, like I said, out of all the ones I talked about, the only two that I currently don't use in my classroom are the team teaching and the parallel teaching. We use alternate teaching. We use station teaching. We use the one teach, one drift. We use the one teach, one observe. And we do all of them, and we kind of rotate back and forth depending on what's going on that day, because you want to mix it up, just like you want to mix it up with your kids. You don't want to stand and lecture to them every single day and then give them a test. They're going to start tuning you out. You gotta, for lack of a better way of saying it, you got to keep them on their toes with what you're doing in class. You got to keep things interesting, keep constantly evolving in what you're doing in class. You also have to make sure that you, like I said, you got to make sure that what you're doing is going to work with the teachers that you have. If you have somebody who is somebody who is reluctant to teach in front of the whole class, like I said, Mr. Davis is, then tag teaming or team teaching or parallel teaching, it's not going to work for you. So don't try to throw them into that because you think that's awesome. Because, I mean, it is awesome, and it does work really well when it's done correctly. You've got to make sure that both teachers are equipped to do what it is that you're trying to do, or else you're setting yourself up for failure on that. Another thing I would add is there's always an adjustment period. Okay, so you always are going to have those first, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Hopefully, it's no more than that. In my experience, I've been on 3 different campuses with 4 different co-teachers. In my experience, it usually takes you about 2 to 3 weeks to figure out, kind of who's going to work where, what holes you both are going to plug, what style of teaching works best for you, which co-teaching model works best for you. So there's going to be an adjustment period. You might find that on day one you tried to do one teach, one drift, and it blew up in your face because the one that was drifting fill in the blank. They were talking too loud while they were trying to help students who were doing it. There might be some issue with parallel teaching because of just that section of content that you were doing, but 3 weeks later, you might be able to parallel teach, right? Like I said, the one teach, one drift, that's an easy conversation of, hey, when you're helping a student, when you're drifting around, let's make sure that we're not talking so loud that you're, interrupting the rest of the students. Let's make sure that, we're not doing things that are going to, impede the learning of others. And so it's going to take an adjustment with co-teaching, especially if you have one of those unfortunate co-teachers who's been living in the world of I'm here for inclusion support, and I'm only here for my special ed students, and I'm only here when they need me to read my test to them, and I got to go. There's cake in the teacher's lounge. That's going to be a struggle to get them back on track. And hopefully you have an administration in place who is like my administration, who wants you to do what's best for students and who is not going to allow that to happen. Like I said, that was a former campus for me. It was a struggle because I would go talk to my administration and would get coach, it is football season. And then on my campus now, it is an absolute no-no. It would even the football coach, the head football coach, the athletic director, he would not put up with that either. So you've got to have that support from administration. But when you do, and when you start working things out and they start clicking well, it is a really, really beautiful thing to watch when co-teaching works. So anyway, that's our presentation on co-teaching here. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to contact me or Mr. Davis. We're up in room 204, and his office is right next door, and we're always there for y'all. Yeah, just let us know if you need anything. Appreciate the time, guys.